Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with Turkish-born Ege Reynolds, the founder and CEO of The Charming Man. Ege chats about his own life and career, his move from Turkey to the US, the cultural differences he encountered, and some personal challenges that he had to overcome. He runs a very interesting business whereby he coaches men who may lack the personal skills needed to function better socially, in particular with women that they may like to date. Let's hear from Ege. Ege Reynolds, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on, Greg. I'm doing really well. We were just talking about the weather before recording, and similar to what you said in Ireland, the past couple of weeks, weather in Poland was terrible. And today is the first day with sun. So I'm doing amazing.
And you're stuck inside recording a podcast with me, eh?
Yeah, well, good company is always good, right?
You've got a very interesting bio. And I must admit, from the minute it hit my screen, I was thinking, I'm interested in chatting to this boy.
That's good to hear.
So what I do know is you're a former software engineer, but you really are the founder and the CEO of The Charming Man. And the other part that I know is that you've been rocking and rolling across the world over the last few weeks or maybe even months. So you're not from Poland, obviously.
No, so I was initially born in Turkey. I lived there until I was 18. So I went to middle school there, high school there. And then for college, that's when I initially went to the US. So one of the reasons I got into coaching in general was when I went from a country like Turkey that's quite family oriented, a little bit traditional, to a country like the US that's a lot more individualized and everything's more open. And there's all these different ways of thinking from people, but also different cultures, different perspectives. That was a really big transition for me that I struggled with because, for example, right, when I got to the US, one of the biggest things people had as a part of the culture was, you walk down the hallway and someone's like, hey man, how's it going? And in Turkey, we only ask that question if we care to know the answer. If you don't care about someone, you don't know who they are, you might say like, hey, good morning, but that's it. So when I went to the US, I thought, oh, all these people want to know how my day's going. Oh, okay, this is cool. I'm going to tell them. And it took me a couple of weeks to realize, wait, I think that's just how people greet each other. And they don't actually want to know how my day's going. So that was quite an interesting transition for me.
So tell me, what part of Turkey are you from?
I grew up in Ankara. Have you been?
I have. Now, Turkey, for people living in Ireland, would be quite a popular holiday destination.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people obviously do the weekend breaks and all that kind of thing in Istanbul, but it was very popular as well from, we were talking about the weather. The weather isn't so reliable in Ireland. So come the summer, most people go to places where you're guaranteed to get some good weather. So for us, a few years, we went to Bitez. Yeah, no, and they're beautiful summer places. What's the town that's very near? Is it Bodrum?
Yeah, Bodrum. Cheshme is also quite common to go. There's so many beaches and places to go. It's hard to pick one.
It's beautiful. The weather was nice. The food was lovely. The people were really nice. We had really good, happy experiences there. So what kind of a town or
That's
city
true.
was Ankara? You know, were you living in the city? Were you out in the country? Describe your life for me, where you were living.
Yeah, many people I think don't know this, but Ankara is actually the capital of Turkey. So a lot of people go to Istanbul or Antalya or Izmir because as a tourist, there's no reason to go to Ankara. It's just a bunch of buildings, a couple of museums you can visit, and the rest of it is like the way I describe it is it's a great place to raise kids because everything's safe, education's really good, you're going to meet other families there. But outside of that, you can visit that city for 3 days and then you'll run out of things to do. So my childhood was pretty much like, very safe, very organized, very nice, but the same thing over and over again for weekends, which was one of the reasons I wanted to go out there and see how the rest of the world worked. Because when I was growing up, my family was, relatively middle class. We could afford certain things, but we were the type of family where we wouldn't go on vacation. So in summer break, it would be, you went to Turkey, right? It would be hot outside. All my friends are going to the beach and I'm just stuck here because we don't have a beach there. So it was a nice, pleasant experience, but I wouldn't say it was very exciting or there was a lot to do.
Okay. And your mum and dad, what did they do?
Yeah, my mom's a civil engineer, so is my dad. And my dad started his own company, so that's what he's been doing for a long time. And around when I was, I think, 6 or 7, they split up. So they had the same profession still, but they kind of do like different things.
And your surname is Reynolds. That's not a Turkish name, I'm presuming.
No, that's not my real last name. I
Okay.
wanted to have a level of, I think sometimes with coaching, or even with like writing content, I don't know if you've ever had this, Greg, but it's like people always know a part of you and not really you. But people may feel like they really know who you are because they've listened to you so much, they've read what you're putting out. So I wanted to have a layer of separation to know, okay, who this person is not fully who I am. And that was like a symbolic meaning where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to use my actual name so that I separate this character, who I am for the business, from who I know I really am. And obviously, there's a lot of overlap, but that was a good way to separate the business from who I was for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm listening to an audiobook at the moment about Lenny Kravitz.
Mm,
And for a period of time, he was going under the name of Romeo Blue.
interesting.
Yeah, thinking that would be cool. And at the point, I haven't got to the very, very end of the book, but what he's describing at the moment, he's just made a decision to come back to calling himself Lenny Kravitz.
Mm,
And there's parallels in the book about him chasing different musical styles and all that kind of thing. But he was saying that he was turning down a lot of musical projects and offers of record deals and all that kind of thing because the music wasn't his authentic self. That was his feeling about it. And
hmm
then when he reflected on his name and trying to come up with a stage name and all that kind of thing, he decided to revert back to Romeo Blue. So, what is your surname?
mm. I don't know if I want to share that. I'd like to keep that information private.
Okay. That's an unusual decision. So, at what point in your life did you change surnames? Was that when you came to the United States?
No, I didn't. I didn't officially change my surname. If someone went for 2 hours and looked me up on Instagram or online, they could probably find it. It's more, this is just the name I use for my business.
Okay. Fair enough. So, you still go by your own regular name, but for the
Yeah,
purposes
yeah, yeah.
of.
Like, if, for example, if we met at a bar and you asked me, I have no problem. But I think, since it's a podcast and it's going to be out in the world, I still like to separate this business from what my name actually is. And, when I meet people, I don't tell them my last name is Reynolds.
Okay. It's an interesting idea, and I'm just thinking about the motivation of someone to want to do that. I'm curious, and one of the things I do on the podcast, and you'll discover this over the next while where we're talking, I follow my curiosity. I try to be the listener in so many respects, and when you're chatting to someone, they're the questions someone will be asking and trying to figure all of that out.
Mm-hmm.
So, growing up in Ancora, in a place that wasn't the most exciting place ever, did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had two sisters growing up.
Were you the eldest, sitting in the middle?
I was the oldest, so
The big brother.
I was the one who kind of had to set an example for everyone else.
And tell me, mum and dad deciding to go their separate ways, was that a big shock in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I was around 6 years old, so as a 6-year-old kid, I think it'd be a shock to everyone. So it was a bit confusing at that time because as a parent, how much of that can you actually explain to the kid? And I think looking back at an age that early, one of the things I realized is it's really easy to pick up on what happens to your parents and then make that a little bit about you, because that's how you kind of perceive reality. Is all of reality relates back to me, and there's no here's a separate person, here's my life. So I think there's a lot of beliefs that I had to work through on my own journey to really understand that. But at the same time, I had a really good childhood. So I think for all of us, we have experiences that may not be as pleasant, and we have experiences that we cherish. And the divorce was just one of the experiences that wasn't the most pleasant.
And again, I'm curious because I separated from my wife when I was 28, and my son was 6 years of age at that point in time. And my daughter, Ellen, she was 3. And he was very upfront in trying to deal with it. He needed to talk to people. If we went to a shop, for example, for no reason, he would start talking to the shopkeeper and start telling the shopkeeper things like, I'm separated. It was a word he understood. I think he tried to deal with it face on by having those conversations and working it out and all that kind of thing. I would say that the relationship that I had with him from that point on was really good. It's funny, when you were separated, you had to make very special effort with both of them. You know, your time with them was very concentrated. It would have been every weekend. But we had a lot of very special times. And when I was with them, it was their time. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't the typical father sitting at home reading the newspaper and, the kids are running around the place and you mightn't be so motivated to spend time with them or whatever. But when it's dedicated time. So, yeah, I think they cope with that. But I must say, as a parent, I feel responsible for how difficult that would have been for them. And in Ireland at the time, it wouldn't have been that commonplace. I think my son felt very bad because he thought he was the odd one out suddenly. There weren't other boys in his class in the same situation. I remember him coming into me one day, and I think he was really happy because he discovered there was another person in his class and they had separated as well. So he wasn't the only one who was in this situation that wasn't normal, or that's how we would have felt. So might that have been you as well? Like, would divorce or separation have been a commonplace thing, or would it have been unusual in Turkey?
Yeah, I think at that time it was a little bit unusual as well. I think now it can be a little bit more common. And as a kid, kind of like what you were describing is at that time, I think since it's so early on in the child's development, everything in a way relates to us. And we can't really separate, like, this is dad and mom's life and this is my life, because dad's and mom's life is like also my life. And for me, the most challenging part of that was understanding that this was their decision and it didn't have anything to do with me. because I think as a kid, you might go like, oh, did I do something wrong? Or, was I part of the problem, or what happened? Because it's your world literally just in a way falling apart. And I think in that sense, what you did from a father's perspective isn't easy either. But I think it's like that can happen in a relationship, and you can kind of build upon that. And actually, same thing with my dad as well, is I'd only see him on the weekends. But when I did see him, it was like we're both just here rather than, like you said, being the dad and like reading the newspaper. You're always there, but you're always in the background. So I thought having that separated time in some sense was also a positive, because we both cherished it more rather than inhabiting the same environment but never really connecting with each other.
Yeah. So there can be good things.
Yeah.
The kinds of things I was told at the time was that it's probably an irrational fear for a child, but they see one of the parents disappearing. And then there's a fear that maybe the other one will disappear as well. It's, it's not very logical, but is something else in my world going to fall apart? The thing that I was told, it was good advice. And it was, make sure they know you were there all of the time, ring them every single day. And those weekend times, never miss a weekend, always be there on time, and be, 100% reliable and consistent, because they needed to know, okay, I can relax now. This is a new norm, but my dad is always there. My mom is always there. And kind of working all that kind of thing through. So as a young man in school and all that kind of thing, what were you interested in? When you got bored with the class, where did Ege go in his head? What did you dream of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like that. I was actually one of those kids who would just study and do homework. Like sometimes I would be on break, and then in the break, I would do the homework for the next day so that when I went home, I could just relax. So I was kind of like a nerd who just understood stuff, got it done really well. I liked studying math and physics and all the complex subjects. And outside of that, one of the things that my mom and my stepdad did when I was little is I didn't get a phone or a computer until I was like, I think 14 or 15, like super late. So when school was done, I came back home. All I had was books. And sometimes instead of using Google like we do now, I'd have to go into an encyclopedia to figure out what a word means or what something is. So I had a lot of intellectual curiosity, and I love to read, be by myself, learn. And I think that's eventually what transitioned me into coaching as well, was just this intellectual curiosity to understand the world better. So I do that. And then outside of that, I also loved playing basketball. So if I wasn't studying and learning something, I was out playing basketball for hours on end, imagining that I was Kobe Bryant and the time was running out and I was shooting a fadeaway. Those were my two things.
That's really cool. So it wasn't, stuck inside the whole time either. And
No.
this idea about traveling, or how did traveling come about? What happened?
Yeah, it was completely spontaneous in some ways, and looking back, very apparent in others. So when I was growing up, as I said, my dad had his own business. So for his business, he'd have to travel a lot. So during the week, like sometimes we'd see him on Saturdays, and literally he would have flown into the city the night before to see us and then like fly out the next day for the next project, because he helped people plan construction timelines so that their projects would be on time. So he had a lot of work in Middle East and Europe and sometimes in Russia. Like he went everywhere. So I got really used to him traveling, but I didn't travel myself until I was maybe 17 and I took my first flight. And then I think the way it happened is when I was studying for college in Turkey, your last year of high school, you just study. Like no hobbies, no friends, no fun. You study because all that's important for your college admissions is the score that you get. They don't look at anything else. So I thought to myself when I was 16, like sophomore in high school, that, okay, if I'm going to study so much, why don't I go to one of the top schools in the world rather than a really good school in Turkey? I'm going to study the same amount. And why not just try? So that's when I started looking into schools in the US, and my school taught like English and Turkish at the same time. So I had enough of a background and opportunity to apply for that. And then when I got to the US, that was the first time I'd ever been in America. Like I'd never visited the school I went to, I'd never visited before. I saw it when I was moving in. And within those 4 years, because it was a school in Los Angeles and it's quite international, although I was just there, I met a lot of people from different cultures. And I always enjoy traveling, like talking to someone who has a different experience of life compared to what you may have experienced. And that's why I love having conversations like this as well. But then the traveling fully began when it was around the time of the pandemic. And one of my friends is a little bit crazy. So he realizes the world is shutting down and he reads one article that says, yeah, this might be harder to get if you're in a warm climate. So the day before everything shuts down, he gets a one-way flight to Mexico, packs his bag, carry-on luggage, and he's like, I'm going to spend this time here. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm just going to be there. So he starts living there, and I was living in LA at that time, and my lease was coming to an end. And I was also like slowly building my business to a point where everything was online. And we were on the phone one day, and he goes, Ege, why don't you come to Mexico? It's great here. There's a sun. The food's amazing. It's super cheap. I know you're building your business. You can save some money as well. And I thought, sure, why not? And that's when I kind of did that first trip. And from that point on, I liked it so much. I invited a couple of other friends and they joined. And then we started traveling all together for 2, 3 years until I came back and settled in the US. And now I'm back on traveling again.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun to travel and see different places. And of course, there are challenges as well. Like, I think people also glorify traveling in some ways. It's not always as it looks on the Instagram pictures, but I find it really fun to meet people from different places.
Can you remember how you were feeling as you came off that plane in LA, about to make your way to the new college? What was going through your head?
That's actually a crazy story. I don't know if you remember this or if this was a big thing in Europe at that time, but me and my dad booked my flight, right? And they had this summer program right before college. So the way they do it, this was super nice. They start the school in July for internationals. You do like a summer program before your school so that you can get adjusted. So I thought, oh, I'm going to do this. We all live in the same dorm, smaller group, easier to make friends. So I signed up for that. And it's around, I think it starts around end of July. So me and my dad book a flight mid-July. We're ready to go. Flight's coming up. Everything's good. I'm packing and all that good stuff. And then the Friday, our flight was on Monday. The Friday before our flight, I was playing some video games with a friend of mine. And it's around 10, 11 p.m. And he goes, Ege, you should go check the news. And I say, okay, but we're playing this game. Is it really that important? Like, the game is really happening here right now. I want to keep playing. He's like, no, this is serious. I go, okay, interesting. So I go down. Everyone's looking at the TV. My family never watches TV. And it turns out they shut down a bridge in Istanbul. Like, if you've been to Istanbul, you know, Boğaziçi, that's like a giant bridge. There's no one there. The military shut it down. And no one has any idea what's happening. So a couple of, I think maybe 10, 15 minutes go by. And then there's a national TV channel. And suddenly they make an announcement that there's a coup happening. And everyone's like, wait, what? This is so random. And we're all very confused. And then 20, 30 minutes after that, the president calls one of the new TV channels, like a news channel, and his face is white. I have never seen this man with this white of a face in my life. He looks genuinely terrified for his life. And that's when we realize, okay, this is real. And now I realize if there's a coup that happens, usually there's so much political unrest that my passport will be invalid. So I can't go to the US. And I'm just like, is this a joke? Is this a bad dream? What's going on right now? And that night, you know, I live in the capital, which is the center for everything, the center for the police, center for the government. That night, there's so many military planes flying by, and it's just crazy. Like around 3, 4 a.m., I think to myself, okay, I'm done with this. I'm pissed off. I'm just going to sleep this off and see what happens tomorrow. I go up to my bed, I get in, and 2 seconds later, my whole house just shook. And my mom was so angry with me. She's like, come down. What are you doing upstairs? Because my room's like all the way at the top. So I come down, we get zero sleep. The next day, it's like a zombie movie. There is no one on the streets. Even police has no idea what's happening. So eventually, there's different ideas about what happened. I don't know, so I'm not going to say anything. But eventually, the coup didn't succeed. So thankfully, my passport was still valid. But US banned flights from Turkey because of what happened. And our flight was on Monday. So we go to the airline and we tell them, okay, is our flight still happening? Like, we need to fly. I'm going to college. Now, one of the things in Turkey is even if things are not working out, people will be like, yeah, no problem. That's definitely getting done. Maybe you experienced that in parts of your vacation as well. So the people say us, okay, no problem, we're flying. And then Sunday night, your flight's canceled. We don't know when's the next time you'll be able to fly. So we had to take a trip from Ankara to Istanbul, Istanbul to Paris, Paris to New York, New York to LA. It took 40 hours. And by the time I landed in LA, I was like, wow, this is life. It's sunny, it's safe, it's super nice. There's no craziness happening. And that was just crazy. Even before school started, I was just happy to be in LA. And in July, the weather's perfect as well. So I know this was a very long-winded answer to your question, but the reason I give the backstory, it wasn't just about going to a different country or starting college for me. It was literally getting away from a zone of chaos and then discovering peace.
I had a woman on the podcast a few episodes back. Her name is Vanessa Conneely. She's a journalist who worked all around the world. And at that time, she was a journalist working for Al Jazeera. And she was based in Istanbul. So she was telling me about it. And an interesting story she told me, you know, she's lived in many, many places. And she loved Istanbul. She thought it was one of the safest cities. And she still says that, even though they were reporting on a coup and everything else. But she still said it was a beautiful, safe country and all of that. So the boy from Turkey, suddenly you're in the middle of LA. Yeah, that was a good experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was good in some ways. I think partially the way I left Turkey tainted my experience for the negative because it was so much chaos. So when I got to LA, I was like, this is amazing. And there's also some cultural adjustments, like the story I told you about. Or I remember in Turkey, like people come very close when you speak to each other. When I went to LA, our first day, me and my dad, we want to ask where the metro is. So I say, hey, excuse me. And this guy takes like a couple of steps back as if I'm trying to rob him. Like,
Back,
well, I just want to know where the metro is.
yeah, back off, man.
Yeah, exactly. So there were things like small things like that were very shocking that took some time to adjust. But I was so grateful. Like, I mean, I was so grateful for the opportunity to just go to school in LA and be in a safe place.
Now, I know you're a young man who was obsessed with your computer games.
Hmm.
Was that obsession, did you bring that to LA with you?
Yeah, actually, the reason I wanted to study computer science, I majored in computer science, was because I thought at some point I'm the one playing the games. I want to be the one creating the games. So I actually build a skill. And even when I was playing games, I played partially for fun, but I also played to get better. So when I was playing, I played competitive games where you'd have a rank and you'd advance, and those can get quite addicting. So one of the promises I'd made to myself was I wasn't even going to download the game because I knew that if I got into that cycle of playing video games in college, I could do that for hours on end. And there were so many people living like this was the only time in my life where I'd be around so many people with similar interests, with the same age group, and just so many interesting things to do that I decided, okay, no more of this. I think I played maybe a few times my first quarter because turns out one of my roommates played the same game, so we played together a bit. But that was where that obsession was kind of done for me.
Did I see somewhere that you even wrote some software for Turkish people using one of those games? I think the popular game you were playing was League of Legends.
Yeah, I didn't write any software. What I was doing was they have all these forums, right? You know, just like you make LinkedIn posts, you could make blog posts in their forums. So I was writing guides about, like, even at that time, I was writing guides about how to play certain characters because when I ranked in the game, I started from the worst ranking. Like imagine a football team and they're like at the bottom of the barrel in like the fifth league and no one knows their name. And then I slowly made it up through the rankings to a point that when you go to the forums, you know, it's a website, everything's recorded. So one day, the way this happened was some guy saw my rating at that time and then saw you could see like people's badges. Oh, this person's ranked at this level now. And he basically commented, hey, how did this guy go from here to here? He was just like at the bottom a year ago. And that almost made within that community that post a little bit viral. And then the Riot Games in Turkey kind of reached out and I started collaborating with them on certain things, but I didn't write any software.
Okay, so, but you became a legend of the game to some people like that.
In some ways.
Yeah. And that moment of transformation, I saw something that you wrote about it. There was a moment in your life where there was a decision to be made. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I'm assuming you're talking about the time where I started dropping weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
225 is the number I have.
Yeah.
You were a big
It's a
boy.
lot. Yeah, I was a big boy indeed. So I played basketball throughout high school and then I quit. But what I didn't quit was eating the amount of food I was eating while playing basketball for hours a day. And eventually, like you said, I went up to 225 pounds, which I think is around like 102 kilograms or something. So I remember in Turkey we use kilograms. I come back from this vacation with my family That was actually the first time we went to Europe. So I come back, I step on the scale, and I see like 101.7 kilograms. And I look down at this number and I think to myself, okay, this is terribly wrong. That was the first time in kilograms that I saw three digits. So something about that just hit me. And one of the things I knew about myself at that time was, okay, if I was going in, I was going to go all the way in. So I decided to be like, okay, that's it. I'm going to lose weight. Now, I went to a dietitian and then I wanted to sign up for the gym. So here's a funny side tangent is one of the cool things that I find about having divorced parents is if one of them says no, you can always ask the other one. It's not a joint decision. So my mom's like, oh, I don't want to have to pay for a gym. It's expensive. And then I go to my dad and he's like, okay, you can sign up for the gym. So I sign up for the gym and I go to a dietitian. And all I did to lose, I think I lost 65 pounds within that year. So I think that's 30-ish kilograms, if my conversions are right. So the first like 2 months, I lost around 10 kilograms. But all I did was to do the workouts the person had assigned me, and then eat the way the dietitian told me to eat. And that was it. So I came back to the dietitian and she saw how much I changed. And I remember she asked me, what did you do? And I told her, I just did exactly what you told me. Doesn't everyone do that? And she's like, no, most people don't make any progress. So that was the first time in my life, I think I saw the power of having a coach in an unofficial way, because it really transformed my life from that point.
And was there a transformation for you beyond the weight issue?
Yeah, it was interesting because there was half transformation, but also half parts of me still saw me as like the fat kid for a few years after that. But part of the transformation also, and I have so much gratitude for actually having been fat in the past, because it gave me so much empathy for people in general. And I saw, oh, this is how people treated me before, and this is how they treat me now, just based on look. And one of the transformations that came with that, I became more socially confident because I knew now that I could honor my word. Like, I always wanted to lose weight. I don't think anyone goes home and says, yeah, I want to be fat. I love being overweight. But the moment I had that transformation, I went, okay, I can stick to the things that I told myself I was going to do. And then that confidence carried over to social situations. And from that moment on, I had this very strong belief that I may not know where to get somewhere, but I know I have the capability and the discipline to figure it out. And that served me a lot since that time.
So that was just a big lesson.
Yeah.
If I apply myself, I can change.
Yeah. Until that time, I thought, maybe I just have bad genetics. That's probably why I'm overweight.
Yeah. Now, there was a part B about that, and that was about dating women, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So the new Ege, with maybe a new name, I'm not sure. You were now on the market for women and with more confidence and all that kind of thing, and you were determined, I believe, to meet women. You were determined to say hello to as many as you could.
I wouldn't say as many as I could. I was determined to live in a way where I'd have more respect for myself, because I think at that time, I would see women who I found attractive and I would just fade into the background, did not say anything. And it wasn't just about women per se, it was also about, like, even in class, I'd know the answer to a specific question, but I wouldn't raise my hand and go, here is the answer, because I didn't want the spotlight on me. So it was a journey specifically about meeting people and meeting women. But the reason I got into it was more, okay, how can I be the type of man who actually honors what I want to do and authentically follow that? And I thought at that time, for a lot of men, yeah, so I've coached men who've done like military missions, who've done really scary things that both you and I would be like, there is no way I could be in that situation. And I've also seen them completely terrified to go speak to an attractive woman. So the way that I looked at this in my own mental model was, okay, if I can really go speak to women I find attractive, parts of me is absolutely terrified, parts of me believes she's definitely out of my league, then I'll get so much out of just stepping into that courage, no matter how the conversation goes, whether she's interested, whether she wants to go on a date, that this will build character. So some people go to the gym and get really big to build character. I did a little bit of that, but I also extended it to this because I remember one of my friends had told me this at that time. Is like, so everything that we want from the world, whether it's a job, whether it's a connection, whether it's someone else you want to meet, is in the hands of somebody else. This is something my friend was telling me. So if I can build a skill or someone builds a skill to reliably go up to people that they're interested in, then that can open so many doors. So I didn't just meet women through this process. There was a part of that, but I also made friends who I could travel with. I also, had people who eventually wanted to either be clients or refer clients. So the higher perspective was, if I can just step into courage, there's a part of my life externally that will unlock, but there's also a part of my mind internally that will unlock, because I had such strong beliefs that I carried from being overweight in the past and thinking, oh, this woman would never pay attention to a guy like me, or oh, she's definitely out of my league. So I almost use this social avenue as a way to heal myself, but as a way to also integrate all these skills that helped me for years to come.
So when did you stop being a software engineer and begin being a coach?
I stopped around 2020. That's when I officially stopped. And for a while, my family didn't know, because I thought, okay, Turkish family, you're either a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a failure. So I'm going to tell them once this is more successful. And my perspective was, if this doesn't work out, I could always go back to a job. So why not give it a try? But then I got that perspective because I took so many risks by talking to people I used to be intimidated by. And that's why I was so passionate about helping people with this, because I realized it's not just speaking to strangers, it carries over to like overall ability and capacity to handle risk, but also build the life that we want.
Did you do some specific training to help you to become a coach and run the business that you're running?
So before I started coaching for my own company, I coached at a company called The Art of Charm, which had been around for, at that time, 12 years. So now probably, I don't know, a long time. And I was coaching there. That was more like social skills training, presentation, some networking. We used to teach class on social circles and things like that. And, I got to work with a lot of people there for a couple of years. And I actually thought that was going to be my job. But then COVID happened and they had to kind of downscale the company. And then I realized, oh, I don't think I have a position here anymore. And that's when I thought, okay, I have the skills. I'm going to give my own coaching thing a full-time try and see what happens.
So you've got a very, very specific business now with a very, very niche audience.
Mm-hmm.
So you're the founder of the charming man.
Hmm.
And who's your target audience? When I read this, I thought, okay, this is really funny. But your target audience is someone very, very specific, isn't it?
Yeah, so I can answer that question in two ways. I think when we were reaching out for these podcasts, I did a lot more stuff around dating and relationships. I don't do that as much anymore. But for the dating stuff, my target audience was mainly, engineers, logical men who had analytical jobs, who wanted to step out of their head and go more into the present moment, into their heart, so they could connect with people better.
Now, why that specific audience? Is that because it's an audience you knew very well, or do you think that specific audience has a particular problem around getting out of themselves and dating and all that kind of thing?
I think it's a combination of both because I used to be that person. And when you're in front of a computer and you're writing software in Python, then you go out, you see the sun almost like burns your skin. It's not the same world. And for me, when I was learning, that was quite difficult. So the way I picked that was, first of all, I knew I had a competitive advantage of knowing how to actually speak to these people because I haven't seen many coaches who used to be engineers. Like a lot of people say, oh, I help engineers, but they may not know how to speak that language. So I can make, an analogy about how you'd write a program and how that would apply to a social situation. So that was kind of my, I think, advantage. And the second part is because engineering usually is such an isolated profession, especially with software, these guys were working from home before it was popular, that I knew there was a problem there. And then a lot of this, like a lot of what you see about my business now, it just evolved over time. So at the beginning, I wasn't like, I'm going to help engineers do this. I thought, I have friends who need help. I'm going to charge some money for it. I'm going to work with them until they get results. And for the next 2 months, these are the only people I'm working with. After that, I'll see if this keeps working. So it wasn't this like grand plan that I crafted. It just came to be that way over time.
It sounds interesting because when you're in business, it's good to be very clear about who your target audience is and what you want to do for them. And as well as that social dimension whereby a lot of people who are doing those jobs, there's a good chance they are doing that work in isolation. A lot of the time, actually, when you experience engineers, there's some good friends of mine who are very successful, in IT, they have their own companies. Typically, when you see them, they could be working with headphones on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even when they are surrounded by other people, I think to concentrate, they just put the headphones on, put on the music, and shut out the outside world. But a lot of the time as well, I think people like that, their brains work in a different way. It's binary. I think a lot of people that we come across, even within Fusion, I typically think people from the IT sector, I guess you're right, engineers and all that kind of thing, people are very logical and analytical. Sometimes the emotional intelligence can be one of the things that they're not very good at. They see everything as problems with solutions. And I think in particular with romance and everything, sometimes logic doesn't always work, it's not always one and one is two or whatever.
That's right. That's one of the biggest things that we would talk about is, you write a program, you have a certain input, the output's always the same. In a social situation, you have the same input based on the other person's mood, the environment, how they feel about you, how you feel about them. The output could be like 1,000 different things. So a lot of engineers who came, they think they're going to get like you do A, then it leads to B, then you do C, then you get to D. Whereas a lot of the coaching is more about the ability to handle uncertainty, the ability to be okay with any outcome. Because really, when someone thinks in a very linear way, what happens is if things don't work linearly, then there's fear. There's a feeling of unsafety. It's not as common anymore as what they're used to. So I think in some sense, their brain does work differently. In another sense, there's also some truth to the fact that like it's such a head heavy profession that if you and I spent that much time in our heads, we would probably get a lot more logical as well. So a lot of what we do is stepping more into the heart, because I think the way people connect in general is not, oh, you share the perfect fact about yourself at the perfect time. It's more, how do I feel about this person and around this person?
And it can't be a surprise if your profession is to be logical. And the reason you chose that profession is because you're a logical person. And if you're good at that profession, well, the reason you're good is because you're really, really good at being logical. So no wonder when it comes to the softer qualities of life that you need a little bit of coaching. So I believe you have 4 principles that you work towards. Can you quickly talk to me about your 4 principles?
Yes, of course. So the first principle is relaxation, which is about recognizing when your attention's pulled away and you're taken away from the moment, whether that's mentally when there's like a story or a thought, or whether that's physically. Maybe someone walks in, you go there and your chest like, what's happening? And being able to relax that. The second principle is expression, which is all about sharing our inner world from a place of compassion without having to hold back or exaggerate. I don't think it's as much in Ireland, but especially in the US, there's a big tendency to overplay things and how cool you are. Whereas the reason I like being in Europe is everyone's a lot more relaxed. So we teach people how to navigate that. I think you're going to say something there.
In Ireland, if you overplay who you are or big up that achievement, there's an expression here, someone will kick the legs out from under you really, really quickly, or they'll bring you back down to earth. And I know in a competitive place like America, where there's so many more voices, you probably need to shout louder and compete harder. They celebrate success, so there's the good and the bad in both.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you chime in on that as well, because I find that even there, usually the people who are impressed by that haven't really lived through the journey. And the people who've like really lived the journey, they know, like they can see behind the layers, which is why I teach this principle, expression, in this way is, a lot of guys, these are logical guys, right? They think, oh, if I talk about my career and how I'm like making big money at Google, or how I have this house and car, this girl is definitely going to be interested in me. But it's not about that at all. And that's where the power of humility really comes in, which ties into the next principle, which is empathy. So empathy, at least the way we look at the principle, is about building trust and also making the person you meet shine in the conversation. It's almost like a podcast in a way. We're having this discussion, you're asking me all these great questions. So when our guys meet someone new, can they do that instead of, again, trying to be in the spotlight? And then the last principle is leadership, which is about first leading your own life in a way that you build self-respect, but then also leading others with good intentions. I think one of the coolest things that I've seen in my coaching is we actually had a guy from Ireland, and he was this guy who came in, he's working at a job that was okay, he didn't really like, and he was super logical when it came to dating and socializing. So he started, meeting women more consistently, and going to the gym more. Like a lot of this is just a holistic transformation. And then he changed his reality so much that eventually he actually quit his job. And now he's doing the traveling thing as well. He was in Mexico and now he's in Colombia. I think that's where leadership truly shines, is if we look at meeting people as a way to build authenticity, how can we carry that authenticity to other parts of our lives?
So what I'm hearing from you, Ege, is that there's a good chance that the people who start your program because they want to make a little change in a part of their lives, they might just have to be prepared for bigger changes that could easily come along.
Yeah. I've seen it from so many people who said, "Man, I didn't know the coaching was going to lead me here, but this life is very cool." Like I had another client, his name's Lloyd, who had been through a divorce, and he was, a bit of an older guy. He felt like, okay, dating's kind of over for me. And then one of the things we realized as we were doing coaching was a big part of his problems came from the resentment he was holding towards his dad for never speaking up, for never, standing up for himself and always just being a nice guy. So one of the coaching calls, we did this exercise where I let go of that resentment, wrote his dad a letter, burned the letter, and then he actually spoke to his dad for the first time in 2 years. So now, like, they're not best friends, but they speak regularly. And I think the power of this type of coaching, when it's done the right way, like the wrong way it's done, you could get in a constant cycle of chasing new woman and completely lose the purpose of life. But if it's done with integrity, then stepping into fears there can also allow people to repair relationships, to take more risk, to be a man of more integrity. And I think that's why I love doing coaching in this way is it's almost like, if your kid's not eating the vegetables, you give them something they want to eat and then hide the vegetable underneath. The woman or the dating aspect that sounds exciting lures people into doing the inner work and actually changing who they are at their core, which then leads to a completely different life.
It sounds risky if you just want a small change, maybe not a big change. Okay, Ege, how can people get in touch with you, and how does your service work? Is it one-to-one? Is it groups? Is it online? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, if you want to get in touch, the easiest way would be to just message me on Instagram. My Instagram is Real Charming Man. So it's REAL and Charming Man. And the way the programs work now is basically I built this community where we have weekly coaching calls, we have workshops, we have modules, and that's more around how to be the best version of yourself while feeling whole inside. And now my business has come to a point where if I want to work with someone more closely, I can just go there and pick someone from that community. So my recommendation would be message me on Instagram. I can tell you a little bit about that. If you want to join that, you do that. And then from there are opportunities to work closer together. And if you don't want to do that, if you took something from this conversation and you take that to heart, like I don't hold anything back in these conversations. And there isn't any magic I share with my coaching clients. I think it's just the energy and the courage and I guess the willingness to step into risk that I'm really trying to transmit here.
That's really interesting. And you're traveling the world at the moment. So are you working and traveling at the same time? Are you managing to do that? You living the dream?
In some ways, it's a dream. I was in Vietnam and it was not as much of a dream because it was quite hectic with certain things and, it can get quite loud. So I think there's pros and cons to this life, but for where I'm at, it works. The pros are I get to see places and see cultures. Some of the cons are, thankfully, I have friends who can also travel. So I have that deep connection. But if you try to do it alone, the connections stay very surface level, which can be challenging for some people.
What's happiness to you, Ege?
Ooh, good question. I think happiness is like this feeling of fulfillment in small moments. Like, for example, on Friday, it was my birthday, and everyone, one of my friends who are not here, were like, "Oh, what are you going to do? You should have a celebration, blah, blah, blah." But me and my friend I was with, we just had some steak, walked around the town, found a place for some dessert. It was such a simple day, but it was one of the best days I had. And I think that's what happiness really is finding the joy in the simple things and then carrying that joy with us as much as we can.
I like it. And what does winning look like to you?
I haven't thought about that in a long time because now that you're asking me that question, I think the societal meaning of winning is like there's always someone who could be losing. And I think there's a way where everybody could win. So I think winning really is like searching for the best outcome for ourselves, for others, but also for the universe as a whole. And I think the most important win really is becoming someone who we could love and we could respect.
Sometimes I explain that to people in a different way. We might both love playing football, and your wish might be to play football all day and all night out on the pitch, kicking the ball towards each other. But if you didn't have a goalpost, it'd be okay, it might get a bit boring after a while. And you
Yeah,
know, when you put the ball in the back of the net and you get that big feeling of yes.
yeah,
So, what gives you that feeling?
playing a part in other people's transformations. You know, when I have days where I feel like, oh, is what I'm doing really impactful? I always look at who people were before we worked together and then who they are now and just how much their life has changed. And that really gives me that feeling.
So, I've got one last question for you, and it's a whopper of a question. It's a biggie.
All right, let's go.
What was your best day ever?
Oh, that is a whopper of a question. Wow. It's so hard to pick. I've had many really good days. Um, hmm. Do you mind if I ask you what yours is? And then I'm curious what that'll be for you. And then I think that'll give me some perspective to answer.
That's a really unfair question. I'll tell you, it's about a feeling. And I describe a thing called perfect moments,
Hmm.
where you end up experiencing a perfect moment. And it's not 3 months later and you think, oh, yeah, that was a great day I had, whatever. But in the moment, you actually realize whatever is happening here, this is just really special.
Mm.
I'm going to describe one of them. I was at a football match and Germany were playing Denmark in the final of a European Championship. I
Mhm.
was there as a guest of Carlsberg. I was working in the drinks industry. I was
Mm.
sitting in the stadium. It was a beautiful summer's evening. The people I was with, they weren't friends or anything like that. But it was a perfect moment, and everything around that moment, Denmark went on to win the game. The match was in Sweden, but we were staying in Copenhagen, so we flew back into Copenhagen after the match. That whole day was a perfect day. I was happy, I was in good form, I was confident in myself. The weather was beautiful. And I would say maybe it wasn't my best day ever, but it was a day I remember because it was so good. And for
Mhm.
no specific reason, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you mean. It does sound like a really good day.
Yeah.
I've experienced that in different contexts, like a perfect day with family and perfect day with friends. Um, One thing that comes to mind, this was one of my really cool experiences, was this is the first time I went to Colombia. So I'm still in college. I think it's my second, third year. And I learned some Spanish in one of the semesters. And then you have 3 weeks of winter break. So winter break, instead of staying in LA, I go to Colombia. It's my first trip that I spent my own money. I saved my own money. I feel like, yes, this is what money is made for. And I go on the plane, make it to Colombia. Flight actually gets a bit delayed. But I remember, I think it was my third or fourth day. Me and my friend are in this place called Cartagena, which is around the coast. It's really hot. But one of the things you can do is they have these boat trips to small islands for just 30, $40. You could go, spend a day there, come back. And I remember I was laying in this hammock in this island. And because it was during the week, we went on like a Wednesday. There was maybe like five more other people. It's a small island, but it's still an island. So I felt like this is insane. Like me from 10, 15 years ago in Ankara in the winter, just like freezing, wouldn't even believe what was happening right now. And in that moment, it almost hit me like this only came into my life because I took a leap. I decided to study in the US, even though I'd never been to a country. And even with this friend that I met, he was the guy I met in like when I was socializing. We just met randomly in Arizona. And then after that, we took this trip together. So all those experiences kind of connected, like the butterfly effect, right? And I realized I never would have been here if I didn't take those risks. And that moment was just perfect. Like I could be in the hammock forever. That's what I remember from your question.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good day.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Ege, thank you so much for coming on the Win Happy podcast. It's been a pleasure. Someday I might meet the Ege who isn't Ege Reynolds, and we can have a pint.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. Thank you for having me on, Greg. I love this conversation. I mean, this conversation, the sun's coming up now, the day is slowly wrapping up. This could be in my perfect day.
Yeah, exactly. Look for a hammock quickly.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much, man. Take it easy. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.